The Galactic Cooperative of civilized species had rules. So many rules. Ambassador Jack Murphy sat through yet another 8-hour council session, watching various tentacled, crystalline, and gaseous beings debate the proper pronunciation of greeting syllables. Not words. Syllables. Apparently someone had accused the hexapodian ambassador of using an insufficiently reverential fourth tone when addressing the Grand Arbiter last week. The resulting diplomatic crisis had already spawned 3 subcommittees. Jack suppressed a yawn, knowing it would violate Protocol 247B respiratory expressions of disinterest. The last time he'd forgotten and stretched during a meeting, the Luminous Confederation had declared a month of mourning, believing he was displaying the ancient human war stance of aggressive limbic expansion. The council chamber itself perfectly reflected its occupants' obsession with propriety. Gleaming white surfaces stretched in mathematically perfect curves, unmarred by anything as crude as personal decorations or practical storage. The seats were arranged in a precise geometric pattern that supposedly promoted harmony, though all it promoted in Jack was a sore back. And now announced Grand Arbiter VA Lum, their bioluminescent patches pulsing in the formal pattern of administrative authority, we shall proceed to today's third motion, the proposed adjustment to the schedule of scheduled adjustments. Jack pulled up his datapad, careful to maintain the exactly 45-degree viewing angle mandated for electronic devices during secondary procedural discussions. The motion was 78 pages long. The first 12 pages were just formal apologies for any offense the remaining pages might cause. When humanity had first joined the Cooperative, they'd assumed the endless protocols were some sort of elaborate hazing ritual for new species. Surely no galactic civilization could actually function like this. 3 years later, Jack knew better. These beings weren't putting on an act. They genuinely believed that civilization itself was built on a foundation of microscopic social rules. The Arxians wouldn't communicate with anyone who didn't perform their traditional greeting dance, which involved 47 precise movements and could take up to an hour. The Quantum Collective required all other species to modify their brain waves to match the collective's harmonious frequency. During negotiations, which gave everyone splitting headaches, and the less said about the Vrox's insistence on communicating exclusively through interpretive color shifting, the better. Ambassador Murphy Varlum's voice chimed like breaking crystal. The council notes that your posture has deviated 3 microns from the standard angle of attentiveness. Do you perhaps require meditation time to realign your spiritual-physical harmony? Jack straightened up, fighting to keep his face neutral. My deepest apologies, Grand Arbiter. I was merely attempting to achieve the optimal angle for appreciating your most recent proclamation. The subtle wisdom contained therein momentarily overwhelmed my human vestibular system. The chamber filled with appreciative murmurs. Jack had learned early on that you could get away with almost anything in the Cooperative as long as you wrapped it in enough flowery diplomatic garbage. The aliens ate that stuff up. Most understanding VA Lum responded, their bioluminescence shifting to the pale purple of diplomatic satisfaction. Now, regarding subsection 7.3.4 of the proposed schedule adjustment protocols. Jack settled in for another 4 hours of mind-numbing discussion. He'd send his usual report back to Earth later, still no actual governing happening. Aliens remain convinced that civilization is when you follow arbitrary rules. Send coffee. At least he had the weekly Human Diplomatic Corps meeting to look forward to. No protocols, no formal gestures, just a bunch of increasingly frustrated ambassadors sharing stories about their latest encounters with galactic civilization. They'd turned it into a drinking game. 1 shot for every new rule about proper tentacle positioning. 2 shots for any mention of harmonious energy frequencies. Finish your drink if someone starts a war by sneezing wrong. The truly hilarious part? The Cooperative thought humanity was just naturally good at diplomacy. They had no idea that every human representative was actually expending tremendous effort to avoid telling them exactly how ridiculous their precious protocols were. As far as Jack was concerned, that restraint alone proved humans were the most civilized species in the galaxy. The first incident was probably Jack's fault. He really should have known better than to drink water during the Crystalline Consortium's annual light refraction ceremony. Apparently, the sight of liquid being consumed during their sacred prismatic displays implied that one found the light show insufficiently hydrating to the soul. The second incident was definitely not his fault. Because how was anyone supposed to know that scratching your nose in the presence of the gaseous collective translated to your molecular density suggests questionable parentage? But the third incident. That was when Jack seriously considered faking his own death and becoming a hermit on some backwater moon. It started, as these things often did, with more paperwork, specifically Form 27,000,006, which had to be filled out in triplicate, notarized by a Class 3 empath, and spiritually cleansed by no fewer than 2 different species religious authorities before it could be submitted to the Council's Department of Departmental Affairs. Ambassador Murphy came the nasally voice of Zarkay Tal, the Cooperative's chief protocol master. Your Form 27,000,006 indicates that you exhaled exactly 7 times during last week's 3rd subcommittee pre-meeting planning session. Our records show 8 exhalations. Zarkay Tal was, in Jack's professional diplomatic opinion, what happened when you combined a DMV employee with a hall monitor and gave them way too much power. The protocol master species had evolved from some kind of hyper-bureaucratic fungus, and it showed. Their entire body was covered in perfectly arranged, color-coded spots that supposedly represented their mastery of various regulations. Jack was pretty sure half of them were just for show. My sincerest apologies, Protocol Master Jack replied, trying not to focus on the fact that someone's job apparently involved counting his breaths. I must have miscounted. Would you prefer I submit a Form 12C9 for respiratory reconciliation, or should we convene an emergency breathing analysis committee? Zarkay Tal's spots turned a smug shade of mauve. Ambassador, your attempt at humor through the suggestion of excessive bureaucracy has been noted and logged. Please submit Form 94D2, acknowledgement of inappropriate diplomatic sarcasm by end of business day. Jack briefly imagined what would happen if he just flipped the table and walked out. The resulting diplomatic crisis would probably generate enough paperwork to deforest an entire planet. Of course, Protocol Master. Now, about the third incident. The thing about the Cooperative's rules was that they didn't just conflict with human nature, they often conflicted with each other. Take, for example, Protocol 153A, all species must acknowledge the cultural celebrations of their fellow council members. Simple enough. Then there was Protocol 472C, no species may participate in activities that might trigger another species' historical trauma. The problem? The Vraxians celebrated their independence by recreating their ancient victory dances. The Plutonians considered any form of dancing to be a reminder of the great rhythm war of their third age. The Quantum Collective required all species to dance during their high holy days. And somehow, Jack was supposed to navigate all of this without causing an interstellar incident. He failed spectacularly. During what was supposed to be a routine cultural exchange ceremony, Jack had attempted to satisfy all protocols by performing a carefully neutral diplomatic movement sequence that his team had spent months designing. The result? The Vraxians saw it as a mockery of their sacred dances. The Plutonians declared it dance-adjacent and demanded reparations. The Quantum Collective insisted it wasn't actually dancing at all, and therefore constituted a grave insult. By the time Zarkay Tal finished listing all the protocols Jack had violated, the document was longer than most human novels. Furthermore, Zarkay Tal continued, their spots now pulsing with righteous bureaucratic fervor. Your attempt to resolve the situation by standing completely still violated Protocol 891F, mandatory participation in cross-cultural athletics. Jack stared at the ceiling and counted to 10. Then he counted to 20, because 10 clearly wasn't enough. Protocol Master, might I suggest that some of these rules may be mutually exclusive? Zarkay Tal's spots turned the color of scandalized efficiency. Ambassador Murphy, are you suggesting that the Cooperative's carefully cultivated protocols, developed over thousands of years of enlightened civilization, might be imperfect? No, Jack backpedaled, adding another drink to his mental tally for the next human diplomatic Corp meeting. I'm merely expressing my own regrettable inability to fully comprehend the profound wisdom contained within these complex regulations. Zarkay Tal's spots settled into a more bureaucratically appropriate hue. In that case, I recommend you attend next month's seminar, Understanding the Understanding of Regulatory Understanding. It's only 72 hours long, and the mandatory meditation breaks have been reduced to 6 hours each. Jack managed to maintain his diplomatic smile, even as he felt his eye trying to twitch. He'd been trained for high-stress situations, complex negotiations, and even potential first contact scenarios. Nobody had prepared him for death by protocol. Thank you, Protocol Master. I look forward to achieving a deeper understanding of understanding itself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go file my weekly report on the proper filing of weekly reports. As he left Ziarke Tal's office, Jack couldn't help but wonder how much longer humanity could keep up this charade of infinite patience. Then he remembered that Earth's diplomatic corps had recently started including Screaming Pillow as a standard equipment request for all off-world assignments. Not much longer, probably. The first pirate attack was treated as an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding. The second was declared a concerning deviation from civilized norms by the sixth attack. The Cooperative had escalated all the way to forming a committee for the discussion of potentially considering action. Jack watched the latest footage from the attack station, his jaw clenching tighter with each frame. The pirates, a previously unknown species from the Galactic Rim, had destroyed 3 civilian habitation rings and stolen enough resources to supply a small fleet. The station's defensive systems had remained offline, because apparently activating them without filing Form 62R9 authorization for emergency defense protocols would have been uncivilized. As you can see, Grand Arbiter Vialum's bioluminescence pulsed with formal concern. This situation requires our most decisive diplomatic response yet. Another strongly worded letter, Jack muttered under his breath. 2 strongly worded letters, Vialum announced triumphantly. And we shall transmit them using premium priority channels to demonstrate the severity of our disapproval. The council chamber erupted in appreciative murmurs. Jack looked around the room, waiting for anyone to point out the obvious insanity of trying to stop heavily armed pirates with aggressive paperwork. If I might make a suggestion, Jack raised his hand at the precisely correct angle for emergency protocol discussion. Earth has considerable experience dealing with piracy. We would be happy to deploy our defense fleet to. Ambassador Murphy's arcade tail's spots turned the color of bureaucratic horror. Surely you aren't suggesting military action? Without first attempting peaceful resolution through the traditional channels of interpretive dance and ceremonial gift-giving. The traditional channels haven't worked the last 8 times we tried them, Jack pointed out. Unless you count the pirates sending back the gift baskets with explosive devices as cultural exchange. Clearly, said a crystalline being whose name Jack could never pronounce without cracking glass, this means our gifts were insufficiently meaningful. I propose we establish a subcommittee to investigate more culturally sensitive offering options. Jack watched as the council devolved into a 3-hour debate about the proper spiritual energy alignment for peace offerings. The pirates had attacked 2 more stations during the discussion. The next week, the Cooperative unveiled their master plan mandatory meditation circles. Every member species would participate in synchronized galactic meditation, theoretically generating enough harmonious energy to inspire the pirates to reconsider their life choices. And how exactly, Jack asked during the planning session, are harmonious thoughts supposed to stop plasma torpedoes? Ambassador Zerke Tail's spots shifted to the color of patronizing superiority. Surely you understand that violence only begets violence. We must show these unfortunate beings a better way. They blew up a hospital section last week, which is why we've upgraded the meditation sessions to include advanced harmony crystals. Jack's diplomatic smile was starting to feel permanently etched onto his face. Have we considered that perhaps these pirates don't share our commitment to civilized discourse? All beings are capable of enlightenment through proper procedural channels, ZRK Tail insisted. Now, regarding the proper spiritual orientation for the meditation circles. The pirates, shockingly, did not appear to be swayed by the galaxy's largest group therapy session. Instead, they seemed to interpret the Cooperative's pacifistic response as an invitation to expand their operations. During yet another emergency session, Jack tried a different approach. What if we just filed some paperwork? Form 89C4 would allow us to classify the pirates as an invasive species, letting us remove them under Environmental Protection Protocol. Ambassador Murphy via Loom's bioluminescence flickered with shock. That would be a blatant misuse of administrative procedures. Heaven forbid we handle violence with improper paperwork, Jack muttered. That would be uncivilized. The council spent the next 6 hours drafting their 3rd strongly worded letter. This one would include formal expressions of disappointment in 3 different ancient languages. Back in his office, Jack filed his daily report to Earth Cooperative continues to fight space pirates with aggressive politeness. Considering starting a betting pool on which will run out first the pirates' ammunition or the Council's thesaurus. Send more screaming pillows. He knew humanity's patience was wearing thin. Every human representative had been instructed to maintain diplomatic courtesy, to play along with the Cooperative's dedication to non-violence. But with each attack, each civilian casualty, each meaningless meditation circle, that patience was evaporating like water on a plasma core. The breaking point was coming. Jack could feel it in his bones, in the way his fellow human diplomats had stopped joking during their weekly meetings and started drinking in grim silence instead. The only question was what would finally push humanity over the edge. He got his answer the next day, when the pirates attacked their boldest target, yet a civilian transport carrying refugees from a dying star system. The Cooperative's response. They proposed establishing a Department of Pirate Relations to open meaningful dialogue about the root causes of unauthorized resource redistribution. Jack's diplomatic smile finally cracked. In that moment, staring at the casualty reports while listening to VA Loom debate the proper format for peace negotiations, he realized that being civilized had never meant being weak. It had meant choosing not to use your strength, and humanity was getting very, very tired of choosing. The message came during another endless council session about proper meditation techniques. Jack read it twice, each word burning itself into his brain. Lieutenant Maria Torres, human diplomatic security officer, killed during the latest pirate attack. She'd died defending a group of civilian evacuees, buying them time to reach the escape pods. The council was still debating whether to upgrade their strongly worded letters to extremely strongly worded letters when Jack stood up. He didn't bother waiting for speaking permission or matching the proper posture for emergency announcements. He just stood, and something in his expression made even Zara Keital's spots fade to a nervous beige. A human died today, Jack said, his voice carrying across the chamber without any of its usual diplomatic courtesy. While this council was discussing the proper spiritual alignment of peace crystals, Lieutenant Maria Torres gave her life protecting civilians from the pirates you refused to stop. Ambassador Murphy Varloon began. Their bioluminescence shifting to the pattern of procedural correction. You haven't submitted the proper forms for. No more forms, Jack's words cut through the chamber like a plasma torch through hull plating. No more committees. No more strongly worded letters. Humanity has played along with your protocols and policies because we respected your commitment to peaceful civilization. But there's something you need to understand about humans. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, optical sensors, and various sensory organs of each council member. Being civilized was never our only option. It was a courtesy we extended because we believed in the possibility of a galaxy united by diplomacy and mutual respect. But civilization doesn't mean allowing pirates to murder innocent people while we debate the proper format for filing our objections. Ambassador Zara Keital's spots were cycling through colors faster than a malfunctioning hologram. Surely you're not suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Jack interrupted. I'm informing the Council that as of this moment, humanity is taking action. We've maintained a defensive fleet in accordance with cooperative protocols. You all assumed it was our only fleet. It wasn't. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and alarmed color changes. Jack continued, his voice carrying over the chaos. For 3 years we've jumped through your diplomatic hoops. We've filled out your forms. We've attended your meditation circles. And the whole time, we've kept our real military strength hidden because we didn't want to frighten our more sensitive allies. He pulled up a holographic display, showing dozens of warships dropping out of hyperspace at strategic points across cooperative space. Ships that made the Council's ceremonial defense vessels look like children's toys. This is humanity uncivilized, Jack announced. This is what we chose not to be because we believed in your vision of a peaceful galaxy. But peace doesn't mean allowing predators to prey on the defenseless. Sometimes peace has to be protected. Sometimes civilization needs to bare its teeth. This is unprecedented. VA Loom's bioluminescence had devolved into chaotic flashing. There are protocols, procedures. The protocols have failed, Jack stated flatly. The procedures have failed. Diplomacy has failed. And humanity is done watching innocent people die while this council debates the proper way to express its disappointment. He turned to leave the chamber, then paused. We'll handle the pirates. Once they're dealt with, we can discuss new protocols. Ones that acknowledge that being civilized doesn't mean being helpless, and that true peace is sometimes protected by the credible threat of force. Ambassador Murphy's Tail's voice had risen to a bureaucratic shriek. This violation of procedure will require at least 17 different forms of. File whatever forms you want, Jack called over his shoulder. I'll review them after we've eliminated the pirate threat. And Tail, you might want to create a new color for your spots. You're about to see what happens when humanity stops being polite and starts being effective. As the council chamber descended into chaos behind him, Jack sent one final message to Earth. Diplomatic facade officially dropped. Sorry about the protocols. Turns out humans can only watch civilians die for so long before we remember that civilization is a choice, not a limitation. The fleet is go. He paused, then added a postscript: cancel the screaming pillar requisition. We won't be needing them anymore. But you might want to send some to the council. I have a feeling they're about to do a lot of screaming. For the first time in 3 years, Jack felt his diplomatic smile transform into something more genuine. It wasn't a particularly civilized expression. But then again, humanity had never been as civilized as the Cooperative thought. They'd just been polite enough to pretend. That pretense was over now. And somewhere out in the darkness between the stars, pirates who thought they'd been preying on a galaxy of pacifists were about to learn why humanity's history books were filled with warnings about poking sleeping bears. The game of playing nice was over. It was time to show the galaxy why Earth had never needed all those rules to be civilized. We'd just been choosing to play along. The thing about watching humans efficiently eliminate a pirate fleet, Jack mused, was that it really highlighted the difference between won't and can't. The Cooperative's observation chamber was dead silent as they watched the tactical displays. Human warships moved with practiced precision, their formations and strategies revealing centuries of military evolution that humanity had somehow forgotten to mention during their membership application. Ambassador Murphy Varloom's bioluminescence had dimmed to a shocked whisper. Your ships appear to be operating without filing any formation adjustment notices. They're also fighting without submitting combat engagement forms, Tail added faintly, their spots a pale shade of bureaucratic distress. How do you maintain proper regulatory compliance during battle? Jack watched as another pirate vessel discovered the difference between humanity's ceremonial defense ships and actual human warships. We find that reducing paperwork significantly improves combat efficiency. The display showed a human battle group executing a perfect pincer movement. The pirates, who had grown fat and lazy preying on civilian stations, found themselves caught between ships that had been designed by a species with rather more practical experience in warfare. But the harmonious energy balance, a crystalline being started to protest, is significantly improved by removing pirates from the equation. Jack finished smoothly. I'd be happy to submit a report on the spiritual benefits of decisive military action. After we finish removing the threat to civilian lives, of course. The human fleet had split into smaller task forces, each methodically clearing their assigned sectors. Pirates who surrendered were taken into custody. Those who didn't, well, they contributed to the growing realization among the council members that humanity's previous diplomatic courtesy might have been exactly that, courtesy. Your ships are violating at least 73 different protocols on acceptable velocities for armed vessels, Tal noted, their spots now showing colors Jack had never seen before. Funny thing about physics, Jack replied, watching another perfect combat maneuver. It doesn't actually care about protocols, neither do pirates, as it turns out. The operation was over in less than a standard day. The pirate fleet, which had terrorized the Cooperative for months, lasted approximately 6 hours against ships that didn't need to file paperwork before firing their weapons. In the aftermath, Jack stood before the council again. This time, nobody commented on his posture or breathing rate. The pirate threat has been eliminated, he announced. 90% of their forces have been captured or destroyed. The remainder surrendered unconditionally after witnessing what happened to their compatriots. We've recovered most of the stolen resources and rescued hundreds of captured civilians. This is unprecedented, Loom managed, their bioluminescence struggling to find an appropriate pattern for the situation. Actually, Jack smiled. It's very precedented. This is exactly how humanity has handled pirates for centuries. We just didn't mention it because we didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But Zerk-Tal's spots were still cycling through previously unknown colors. Your species seems so naturally diplomatic, so civilized. We are civilized, Jack agreed. By choice. Being civilized doesn't mean being incapable of violence. It means choosing not to use violence unless necessary. And when violence becomes necessary, it means being very, very good at it. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the human fleet's efficient elimination of the pirate threat. Everything you've seen today, the ships, the tactics, the training, we had all of this when we joined the Cooperative. We just chose not to mention it because we respected your commitment to peaceful diplomacy. You deceived us, a crystalline being vibrated with shock. We edited our application materials, Jack corrected. Just like how your species doesn't mention your ability to shatter reinforced hull plating with harmonic resonance, or how the quantum collective doesn't advertise their capacity to collapse electron fields. Every species has capabilities they choose not to use in the name of civilization. Understanding was finally beginning to dawn across the council chamber. Humanity hadn't been naturally diplomatic, they'd been expertly diplomatic, hiding their military capabilities behind a carefully maintained facade of peaceful cooperation. Consider this, Jack continued. Would you rather have allies who are incapable of violence, or allies who are very capable of violence but choose peace whenever possible? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Zerk-Tal's spots cycling through their entire color spectrum twice. Now, Jack smiled his diplomatic smile, which suddenly seemed much more interesting to the council members, about those new protocols we discussed. I have some suggestions for updating the Cooperative's defense policies. And yes, Protocol Master. I've already filled out the proper forms for proposing changes to fundamental regulatory frameworks. He paused. I filled them out after we finished eliminating the pirates, of course. Priorities. The council chamber remained silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't needed their endless rules and protocols to be civilized. They'd just been polite enough to play along. And now every species in the Cooperative was quietly reassessing their assumptions about their seemingly diplomatic human allies. Jack's smile widened just a fraction. Sometimes the most effective diplomacy was reminding everyone that being diplomatic was a choice. 6 months after the pirate incident, the Galactic Cooperative of civilized species had undergone some interesting changes. The endless protocols remained, of course, bureaucracy finds a way, but they'd been amended with what Jack considered some much-needed common sense. Form 62R9 authorization for emergency defense protocols had been reduced from 67 pages to 1, with a simple checkbox labeled immediate threat to life. Skip to Section 3, the Cooperative's definition of civilized behavior. They had been updated to include the proportional application of force in defense of civilian lives, and perhaps most significantly, meditation circles were no longer considered an acceptable response to armed aggression. I must admit, Varlum's bioluminescence pulsed in the pattern of reluctant recognition, that humanity's unique approach to civilization has proven surprisingly effective. We'd prefer to think of it as comprehensive diplomacy, Jack replied, watching the newly established cooperative defense fleet run through training exercises. The ships were still painted in ceremonial colors, but they now carried something more potent than strongly worded letters. Though I must ask, Zerk-Tal's spots had finally settled into a new color pattern that Jack privately thought of as bureaucratic acceptance. Why didn't humanity simply announce its military capabilities when joining the Cooperative? Surely that would have been more efficient. Jack smiled his diplomatic smile, which everyone now recognized as exactly that, diplomatic. Would you have believed us if we'd told you that we maintain peace through strength? That true civilization isn't about the absence of capacity for violence, but rather the wisdom to know when not to use it. The silence that followed was answer enough. Humanity learned long ago that being civilized isn't about pretending to be harmless, Jack continued. It's about having the power to cause harm and choosing not to use it except when necessary. We played along with your protocols not because we had to, but because we respected your desire for a peaceful galaxy. We just disagreed about how to maintain that peace. And now V.A. Loom asked. Now we have a cooperative that understands that sending strongly worded letters to pirates isn't civilized, it's negligent. That allowing civilian casualties while debating proper meditation techniques isn't peaceful, it's cowardly. And that sometimes the most diplomatic solution is reminding people that diplomacy is backed by something more substantial than paperwork. The tactical display showed ships from various species learning to work together in combat formations. It turned out that once humanity had broken the ice, several other species had admitted to maintaining similar hidden capabilities. The crystalline consortium's sonic weapons were particularly impressive. Though I do have one question, Jack added. Did anyone actually believe we achieved spaceflight without developing weapons? Did you think we just asked physics nicely to let us break out of our gravity well? Zerkatel's spots shifted to an embarrassed mauve. We may have been somewhat selective in our interpretation of historical data. Just like we were selective about which human capabilities we included in our membership application, Jack grinned. Funny how diplomacy works sometimes. As he watched the new cooperative fleet running their drills, Jack reflected on how sometimes the best way to maintain peace was to be very, very good at war. Humanity had simply been the first to remind the galaxy of that fact. His daily report to Earth was considerably shorter than usual. Cooperative finally understands that civilization is a choice, not a weakness. Protocols updated accordingly. Send coffee. Turns out several species want to learn human military traditions, starting with caffeine consumption during strategy meetings. The galaxy was still civilized. It was just civilized with teeth now, and if anyone else got ideas about preying on civilian stations, well, they'd learn the same lesson as the pirates. Sometimes the most diplomatic solution is reminding everyone that being diplomatic is a courtesy, not a constraint. And humanity was very, very courteous right up until they weren't.